It is always exciting to see the Mistral again, my first ship, my first vessel that made me see the world sailing through the sea. First boarding for a sailor is like imprinting for a puppy, opening its eyes and seeing its mother for the first time. Welcome to my channel. This is a special video for special sailors, the Wolves of Ontario. For this reason, my outfit is somewhat eccentric and original, but certainly not casual and worn with pride and pride. Today, I will not tell you a story of seas and sailors. Today, I will tell you about deep emotions and sensations that you have not experienced and will never be able to experience unless you are among those who have been part of this adventurous journey. Just one guarantee: there will be no room for boredom. And if you skip the video now, you have no idea what you missed. The introduction served as a scenario of mysterious and intriguing narration. What I will tell you, you will live, concentrating intensely and immersing yourself in the atmosphere of bored as immersed in a surreal space-time environment. Surreal especially for the generations from the 90s onwards. How can you get the most? Of identification, two fundamental things, basic for vision. Watch this video with lochermont.tv opke. Look at it all in one breath. I would also add, stay away from everything that is modern technology, starting with your smartphone. For the duration of the video, ready, get on board. And let's get started. First, let's see where we are. It's 1985. This was the phone you had at home, and this was the phone you used to talk to girls. This was our iPod. This was our forum. These were our onboard PCs. Everyday morning cooling had Mom TV and immense crew. We sported a beautiful jukebox like this, that's the era. And then on a technological level, this was the Mistral. A few last sea glimpses of the sonar shell. I'm not kidding. Military technology in the 80s was way ahead of civilian technology. All the best resources were used in the East-West geopolitical confrontation that was going on at that time. But there was another passion that dominated the youth of the 80s, the magazines, comics, and comic book collections that acted as a backbone for the dreams of teenagers, heroes to whom we were all inspired, especially boys. For example, collected Tex Willer, Zagor, Big Black, Captain Mickey, etc. And then there's him and Commander Mark and the Alder Wolves. Who is Commander Mark? Against the background of the war that in the second half of the 18th century saw the Americans fight for independence from the British. Our commander is immediately presented to us as handsome and brave, handsome and invincible, but without the antipathy that often arises from the superiority of the protagonist towards the world around him. Mark is confident enough to make him a hero, and he has experience to give us confidence. Exceptional in his field was the relentless fight against the soldiers of His British Majesty, the notorious Redcoats, which he put to good use on every occasion, always with success. For this reason, his name inspires terror and dismay in the ranks of the Crown's supporters, and to no avail. We need bounties, blackmail, traps, ambushes, traps, deceptions, etc., etc. Cunning as a fox, elusive as a ghost. He runs through the forests of Canada with his wolves. Mark, accompanied by his inseparable companions Mr. Bluff and Sad Owl, not forgetting the dog flock. It seems immortal as the symbols it embodies, those of justice and freedom. Alongside him move the loyal Ontario Wolves, a formidable group of warriors made up of men and women from all walks of life, ages and backgrounds. People with different histories behind them, but united by a single great desire to fight for the right to live free. And every time between the forests of Canada their song of Ontario resounds and the wolves are for America, we fight, tremble, tremble, red coat, the hour, now the rescue. More or less, the hated invaders will have something to tremble about. It makes a certain impression to think that in 2024, Commander Mark celebrates 58 years of life. All the great heroes of the adventure, in addition to enjoying a poetic immortality, are and remain eternally young. Like us wolves, on the other hand, the affection that accompanied Commander Mark until the conclusion of the series. The last special dedicated to him came out in 2000. He never went out. Even for those who still didn't know him, after this video, will therefore have the opportunity to appreciate him, do some research, and can start to love him a little, despite the time that the characters of that era spent. They have the enviable gift of not getting old. They are knights with a pure heart, tenacious, courageous, and supportive boys, friends who never betray and never lose their smile, symbols of a soap and water adventure that is increasingly difficult to find nowadays. Anything that identifies, we can say. Of that generation of Ontario wolves, in spite of the chronological clocks. And now we begin our adventure. La Spezia Naval Base, inside the Maritime Military Arsenal, Dock, is May 29th, 1985. There is excitement around the Maestrale ship. The ship is on a mission that will take her across the Atlantic Ocean and into the heart of Canada. Boarding provisions, completed various supplies, completed crew. Everything on board is ready for the general maneuvering place. My seat, as per the dashboard, is center left. I'm very excited, and I think my teammates are too. I hear the turbines rising, and a cloud of smoke envelops us, like every time the ship leaves the dock, with the smell of diesel filling the air. As the engines begin to propel the unit, I see a ship that was moored beside us slide backwards. We're moving. The speed increases. We get out of the military obstructions and start to travel the Gulf of La Spezia to gain the open sea. I continue to look at the landscape in front of me, seen many times. But this time it is different. This time it seems to me that everything is more beautiful, exciting as the promises of this adventure. Looking ahead, I spot the San Terenzo, Lerici, and Telaro shipyards slipping away. The Ligurian Sea now offers no room for maneuver. I rush aft to the flight deck and glance back. The island of Tino and its smaller counterpart, Tinetto, still stand as silent sentinels of the Gulf of La Spezia. This moment is truly captured in the rare beauty and serenity of this place. Watching them fade from view is a poignant reminder of the boundless adventure lying ahead. I bid you farewell with a heartfelt greeting. Leaning over the side of the ship, my gaze fixes upon the horizon and the impending adventure. A dream place for a 20-year-old looking for a first glimpse in 1985 to Ponta Delgada, Portugal, right in the heart of the vast Atlantic Ocean. The sea's immeasurable expanse promises numerous opportunities and thrilling experiences. The Atlantic Ocean? Just thinking about it excites me enormously to get out of the Mediterranean to face this giant. But there is an important point that must be celebrated. The passage of the Pillars of Hercules, the passage of the Strait of Gibraltar. The Strait of Gibraltar is the stretch of sea that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the west and the Mediterranean Sea to the east. Bounded to the north by the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula and to the south by the African continent, it has a length of about 60 kilometers, while its width. It ranges from a minimum of 14 kilometers to a maximum of 44 kilometers. The waters of the strait wash the coasts of Morocco, Spain, and Gibraltar. In ancient times, the two towns facing each other on both sides of the strait, the Pillars of Hercules, were called Calpe and Abila for the sailors of the Mare Nostrum. The Mediterranean. Crossing this passage still means sailing towards more restless and adventurous seas. The excitement is also reminiscent of maritime traditions linked to exploratory voyages before Christopher Columbus. The unknown is the desire for adventure. With the desire to discover new seas and new lands, it has always been a characteristic of sailors, which is why it makes a charming and romantic figure, even, for example, in the history of Caribbean piracy, the saga Pirates of the Caribbean Dorset. So the crossing. For those doing it for the first time, it must be ceremonial, certified, and I assure you this is serious. So serious that it is officiated even by the captain of the ship and his second officer, with a committee of veteran officers and non-commissioned officers. Our commander was Captain Franco de Girolamo, called. Maybe the Dragon. I'll tell you later, because, and her second in command was Frigate Captain Franco Farnetti. Some may wonder why there was a ship captain in command of a frigate and not a frigate captain, as was expected for that type of unit. Well, our commander. He was also the commander of the 7th Squadron Fregati with the acronym as SQUAF 7, composed in addition to the Maestrale by its twins Grecale, Libeccio, and Siroppo. Ergo, the rank to carry out this type of command post had to be higher than that of frigate captain. But back to our ceremony. As you can see, after the baptism performed with an ad hoc instrument pareta for anal spraying, the commander or his second certified the anointing with regular written attestation A, where I was during this ceremony. Unfortunately, watch shift to the boys only. There is no exception to guard services on board, especially in navigation. And in this case, I was the ear, as well as the virtual eye of everything that happened under the hull of the Maestrale. Let us never forget the historical period, the Cold War. The enemy was always in ambush, and the Strait of Gibraltar, a strategic site, was very crowded in all directions, above and below. But let's go further. Now the horizon is oceanic, and the bow points towards Punta Delgada, Azores Islands. Right in the heart of the vast Atlantic Ocean. After 5 days of navigation from our departure from La Spezia on the morning of June 3rd, 1985, we arrive in Ponta Delgada, a town on the island of San Miguel, capital of the Azores archipelago under Portuguese flag and government. It was the first destination outside the Mediterranean, and therefore the whole crew wanted to visit the island with a 4-day stopover. We really enjoyed the hospitality of the island and its islanders. Really a nice experience. As you can see from some of the photos, we had the opportunity to make multiple experiences. Ah, this picture. It's not an error. It's not Switzerland. We're still in the Azores. Maritime traditions, which I've mentioned before, especially those of the Navy, have some interesting practices. A video wouldn't cover it all. What an idea. I'll consider it and update you. Speaking of maritime traditions, the Navy has peculiar customs. For example, there would be the possibility of drawing your own coat of arms in the ports that the ship considers important to thank for the welcome. I don't know from whom this idea started. Perhaps from the commander himself, because knowing my artistic abilities, someone proposed that I work to execute a stylized coat of arms of the Maestrale on the wall. In front of the ship, and so the good boatswain on board opened his paint cove and pulled out a palette of colo reduced to the essential but sufficient of green, anti-rust, anti-fouling, red, white, and yellow signaling, blue identification from internal flooring. Floating black, and other than I don't know where he took it out and put it at my disposal, said. Here is the result. Note the date, June 6, 1985. Well, the next day we dropped the moorings. heading to the island of Bermuda. Another 5 days of sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, and on June 12, 1985, we arrive at the island of Bermuda. I know very well. What is the question that is churning in your head? Did something strange happen while you were sailing? Nearby, what I tell you is this. I will tell you an anecdote that could be an invention to satisfy you, fulfilling your morbid curiosity, or what I will tell you has never officially happened for reasons of confidentiality. Military. So I repeat. What I'm going to tell you could be my own little story. I was on guard duty at the sonar, normal surveillance and exploration activity, when suddenly I lose the representation of marine echoes and passive sonar. Plunged into absolute silence, as if the sea or the representation of the sea under the hull of the Maestrale no longer existed any other detail, my bow rotated quickly to the right, to the bottom of the screen, to appear on the other side, and occasionally reverse the direction of rotation, as if the ship was spinning on itself. For those who know the sonar representation of an 1164 knows what I'm talking about. For everyone else, I feel differently. I hope you know what a gyrocompass is well. Every ship has one to rely on in the event of a blackout of all other navigation systems, including GPS. So every operating room has a graphic gyrocompass repeater, and it couldn't be missing inside the solar room. So I had my gyrocompass repeater to my left, looking up. And that's exactly what I did. Looking at the repeater, I saw the graduated plate turning and the cursor also turning frantically in one direction and then in the other, as if they no longer had any reference of the Earth's magnetic field, and I won't tell you what was simultaneously happening in the cockpit. I just tell you that it was a beautiful sunny day, and the sea was a table, and the phenomenon, as it had suddenly appeared after a few very long minutes, disappeared, and everything went back to normal. This allowed us to dock at the Royal Navy base in Bermuda. I made it all up. Maybe why not? But I'm sure you liked it, because it could be plausible. This second stop was longer than the previous one. This time, we stayed 5 days in Bermuda, and we all enjoyed swimming on the beautiful beaches with white sand and crystal clear sea, even if dangerously infested with sharks. I always hear the exclamation of joy of my friend, comrade of Sergeant and A.S. Andrea Sassolaro. Forgive me, my Romanesco. Oh, Raga, do you realize that? We were bathing in Bermuda, dreaming. At 20 years old, we were living a dream. You know what? On that occasion, I also discovered why shorts are commonly called Bermuda shorts. I was walking through Port Hamilton with my dear fellow adventurer. Below, Chief Signalman Salvatore Grasso, when suddenly, turning a corner, we see two businessmen approaching us incomplete, jacket, tie, and briefcase, 24 hours order. What was so strange? It was the songs. Salvo and I looked at each other, and together we exclaimed, Bermuda. We were so well received that even here the commander wanted to make a gesture of thanks. Guess what exactly? Bravi. At the Malabar Naval Base, that was the name of the place where we were moored. It was tradition, needless to say, that all visiting naval units left, if they wished, the design of their coat of arms on the walls of the buildings in front of the wall. It was full of coats of arms of ships from all over the world. What struck me is to see the drawing of the cruiser Sheffield sunk by the Argentites in the Falklands Malvinas war a few years earlier at the top of the tower. In this picture, the small one, I had to choose a place for ours, and I chose it on this building, still with few coats of arms. I wanted to put it on. As high as possible to avoid acts of vandalism or modification by some good-natured person, so where to place it? Not under the English one, because so high up I didn't want anyone to be able to put their own on top of ours and possibly avoid the hips and below as well. As you can see from the position, I stuck it right under the canopy near the corner of the building above a blind window compartment, leaving only one side free. Not only that, I enjoyed making it much larger than the ones already present to take up as much space as possible. It was at a height of about 5 meters, and I had to climb on a scaffold made available by the base. Needless to say, the commander understood my game and was pleased with it here too, if you look closely at the photo. Unfortunately, it does not make the date that we glimpse. It is June 16th, 1985. The next day, leaving the moorings, she heads for Canada. The voyage from Bermuda to Canada was marked by a tragic event. A planned exercise between the Maestrale and the Canadian Navy called PASSEX, an acronym for Passage Exercise. I do not remember whether it was supposed to simulate the forcing by the Maestrale to an imposed naval blockade. From Canadian ships had a transformation into a real SAR search and rescue at sea. What had happened? At the latitudes of the coast of Nova Scotia in Canada and Maine in the United States, storms are frequent. To give you an idea of where we were, it's that area that the 2020 film The Perfect Storm, starring George Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, and Diane Lane, refers to as the North Atlantic area. Luckily, there wasn't a hurricane brewing like in the movie, but the sea wasn't there at all, man. It was becoming more and more difficult to steer the ship, and this was true of all the ships employed in this exercise. The Canadians had several units. In my memory, and that of my comrades, we remember some names. For example, there was the Yukon, the SAS Kachevan, the ROQ, etc. And it is from Iro here that a young Canadian sailor falls into the stormy sea. Immediately, the alarm is given. The exercise is interrupted, and we move on to the search and rescue of the sailor. Many very long hours pass. Nothing. That sailor's body was never found. It lies like many others in the arms of the depths of the sea, and after a couple of days of research, we abandoned the area to enter the port of Alivans. On June 22, 1985, 2 days ahead of the expected date of arrival, we entered the Halifax harbor to moor at the anchor, waiting for the place on the dock. Ships of 12 different navies were waiting, including ours, to which was added the Canadian Navy. The organization was impeccable, and even the view of this wonderful city lifted us up after the events of the last days at sea. The thing that struck me first were these wonderful suspension bridges. First of all, this that crossed the whole bay. Today it is called Angus MacDonald Bridge, and behind it was the Murray McKay Bridge. Excuse my English, remember this was the 80s. I had only seen things like this in TVO photos, so electrifying experience. That's why you see them. Do you see these bridges in many of my photos? Finally, we moored at our place at the waterfront in the downtown area of Halifax, the city center practically under the historical site of Fort Halifax Citadel, where from there a few days the ceremony of the 75th anniversary of the Canadian Navy would take place. The Canadian welcome was really warm, also because in Canada there is a strong Italian community, also well organized. This is the brooch of the Italian-Canadian Cultural Association, IPCA. Here I show you, in particular, enlarged, that is awarded to all members of the association. And we, Italian sailors of the Maestrale, needless to say, were all appointed honorary members, and we were given this one that we wore as an exception to the uniform during the stop in Canada. The bestowal was made with a beautiful ceremony at ICA headquarters in Halifax, with a reception including dances and buffet. How many Italian-Canadian hearts and Italian sailors met on that occasion? Meetings that also followed after our return to Italy. But that's another story. The girls in Halifax seemed crazy about the Italian sailors. I'm not kidding. It was embarrassing to be booed on the street by girls with explicit invitations to hang out with them. Even the press noticed it, and here we see our ETA underboss electrician, Michelle Savarese, kidnapped by the indigenous women of Halifax. Let's read the dedicated caption. Obviously translated into Italian, it says, "Welcome, he who finds keeps." Linda Demings left, and Nancy Scott of Halifax can be forgiven for arguing about this young sailor's ownership of the Italian frigate Maestrale. But soon, both will be able to make their choice. This weekend, the city will be full of sailors from 4 foreign ships. We were the first of a multinational fleet to help the Canadian Navy celebrate its 75th anniversary. Even though the first 4 ships of different flags had already arrived, Italy stood out with the arrival of all the other ships. Remember that representation. It was from 12 countries plus the Canadian Navy. That wouldn't have changed much. The hunt for the Italian sailor was open, and we, counting everyone from the commander to the last Maro, were no more than 225 outboard crew members. There was a town with tens of thousands of girls. Hunting was a real effort, but as Italian sailors, we had to maintain the honor of our homeland. All sailors up to 4 years of Navy seniority were obligated to go out in uniform. Non-commissioned officers also followed this rule. The privilege of bourgeois dress belonged to the ship's elders, a privilege they gave up when they were completely ignored by the Canadian girls because they were considered as normal, habitual tourists in the city. After the first day aboard the Maestrale, only uniformed personnel came ashore. Who knows why? To make you understand the level of Italian sailor hunting, I can tell you one of my particular experiences. During that stop at Halifax, my dear friend Salvatore Grasso and I were on Barrington Street at the corner of Spring Garden Road. I am so precise because remembering the place I did research with Google Maps. We are now in the 21st century. By then, what's special about this place? A cemetery. A cemetery in the middle of downtown. Something rather bizarre and inappropriate for Italian culture. Above all, it was well visible with the headstones and graves observable from the sidewalk. But there is more, and you will understand why this memory remained so etched in my memory. It was a windy evening, the road was not well lit, and it was very late, close to 0000. Don't laugh, it's a serious story. I said there was a lot of wind, and it was also chilly. In our brisk pace to get back on board, except looking at those tombstones in the dark of the park, he blurts out a phrase like this: I think if one of these comes out. He still had the words in his mouth when, in spite of the noise caused by the wind and the branches of the trees, we hear a loud and insistent knock behind us. What do you say? We got a hit. We turn around and across the street from a shop window, maybe a pub now, I don't remember, 2 guys were banging hard on the glass to get our attention. We looked at each other and without saying a word, we ran to hear what they wanted from us. The girls were finishing cleaning the place. They were locked inside and could not open by writing a note. They told us to copy an address and a time, and wanted to make sure we wrote and made us promise that we would meet the next morning at that place and at that time. Gentlemen, this is Krista and Jennifer. We spent beautifully together. The sailor's cap on Christ is that of Salvo, who is taking the picture of us, and the petty officer's cap is mine on Jennifer. And this is where this story ends, because Salvo and I have a family, and all this belongs only to the past. As mentioned earlier, this anecdote served to highlight the type of welcome and treatment that the citizens, and especially the towns of Halifax, had reserved for the crew of the Maestrale ship. Now I will tell you about the purpose for which we were in Canada, and especially in this beautiful city, the 75th anniversary of the Canadian Navy. That this ceremony was very important is evidenced by the presence of Queen Elizabeth, second Queen of the Commonwealth, and therefore for Canada, who in a sort of review pass and review all the ships moored and deployed in the harbor, 12 nations, Italy, Holland, Norway. Portugal, the United Kingdom, the United States, Belgium, Brazil, Denmark, Finland, France, West Germany, because Germany was still divided at that time. There was the East Bloc and the West Bloc, and with the 13th Navy. That is the host one, Canada, a really spectacular thing. A similar vision can hardly be expressed in this way in the navies. But the thing that amazed me, and I think my companions in the adventure, was the uniforms and bearing of the sailors of the various navies. I had the privilege, along with, if I'm not mistaken, 21 others. Sailors and non-commissioned officers under the command of an officer to be part of the ceremonial platoon inside the fort's parade ground. So to be able to admire these fantastic differences with their best uniform and representative configuration. Of course, we were no less. A peculiarity was that all the visiting squads were unarmed, apart from the sabers and other uniform accessories provided for these occasions. Unfortunately, no photos. We didn't have today's technology. Never forget that while watching this video. The only ones with guns were these redcoats. Keepers of the fort and tradition belonging to the 78th Highlander, Scots, 3rd Royal Artillery Brigade, which in 1869 was garrisoned at the fort. This one I, of course, retrieved from their official site. I'm not that good. How did the deployment take place? For the military, the known term, while for the non-means the collection point established before each parade, was in an area in front of one of these doors. I don't remember exactly which one it was. However, as the squadron formed itself, it marched through this gap. And going to take his place in Piazza Dadi, the particular thing was that the first to enter, that is, on appeal, did not go to line up in the farthest position, but immediately occupied the first position, and then the next one paraded in front of him, and then positioned himself next to him, and so on. Until the completion of the lineup, we, if I remember correctly, were in a row of 3. No jokes about the rest of the 2. I said we were in a row of 3 and we were between the 8th and 10th to enter. Guys, what an emotion to parade in front of these sailors like us, but with a different uniform, seeing the French with their classic red cheerleader on their cap, the Germans who looked like they came out of a movie of the Second World War, obviously without the eagle of the Kriegsmarine. At the time of these facts, that was the Bundesmarine. Today, with German unification, the Deutsche Marine. And their particular cap with the dangling ribbon, not to mention the Scandinavian navies. Those were Vikings, but seriously, tall, super long hair and bushy beard. Service earring, great. The simplest, in my opinion, was the United States, a division that you all know and its unmistakable Casiota on its head, which for our sailors in my day was the work cap. Really unique experience. A commemorative coin was also minted for that particular event. But after all this work, the warm Canadian welcome, and especially the embrace of the Italian community, represented by the ICA. How could we not reciprocate with our proverbial Italian hospitality? And no, we couldn't help it. And so we invited the people of Halifax to visit our beautiful and futuristic, at that time, ship. On these occasions, an external safety route is set up with access only through the bridge. No other internal premises, for reasons of military confidentiality, are available for visits. All accesses to internal premises are strictly guarded and supervised. Do you always remember the historical period? But the highlight of our gratitude and hospitality were our parties on board. How to organize a party on board a military ship while maintaining high standards of security, confidentiality, weaponry, and combat systems. Nothing too complicated for us sailors of the Maestrale. We had a very spacious flight deck and an equally spacious shelter hangar for helicopters. It is true that practically the visitors would have found themselves a few meters from missiles on the head and torpedoes in the warehouse adjacent to the hangar, but they did not see them, and with the due precautions, surveillance and iron ban on smoking, we were quiet. In this picture, we see the flight deck and hangar. The hatch of the hangar was open completely, doubling the access that you see as if it were to house helicopters. The helicopters Il Maestrale embarked 2 at the time were placed and anchored to the deck at the stern end of the same, with the tails completely protruding. Subsequently, a tent was mounted, commonly called shake, because it recalled that type of tensile structure and sealed all the accesses inside the Maestrale. Here you see a picture on another occasion, just to give you an idea of how this tent was set up. The helicopters were positioned where you see the group of people in this picture. The party on board with its orchestra and its DJs, needless to say, was a success with a buffet prepared by the excellent cooks on board and Italian-Canadian drinks. Record turnout, especially of the young female gender. And it is now superfluous to explain it to you because with limited access due to capacity and presence of local authorities above representatives of the ICA. In practice, a beautiful party, but without any excess. And the successor made a bunch of girls wish. To follow by land with their means, the Maestrale, for all its stages in Canada, to which they could arrive, and finally, on July 2nd, 1985, we left the moorings of the port of Halifax in a northeast direction to double Cape Breton and enter. At the mouth of the San Lorenzo River. The St. Lawrence River originates in Lake Ontario, between Kingston, Ontario to the north, and Wolfe Island in the middle, and Cape Vincent, New York to the south. From here, it passes through Gerenuk, Brockville, Ogdensburg, Massena. Cornwall-Muriel, between the Riviera and Quebec, before flowing into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the world's largest estuary. It stretches 1,997 kilometers from Lake Ontario, extending to 3,058 km, including the North River in Minnesota. The river includes Lake St. Louis, Lake St. Passois at Salaberry de Valleyfield, and Lake St. Pierre east of Montreal. Its islands include two archipelagos, the Thousand Islands near Kingston, and the Okalega Archipelago, which includes the Montreal Islands. It is Jesus Island to the valley, as well as Orleans Island to Quebec. It is the island of Anticost north of Gaspé. It is shared by two states, Canada and the United States. What a ride, guys. A nice trip to get from the Atlantic Ocean to Lake Pontale. The river up to Montreal is navigable without any difficulty because its level decreases towards the ocean in a very gentle way, quietly allowing navigation in both directions, that is downhill and uphill. But from Montreal to Lake Ontario, the discourse changes. There are channels that they bypass rapids, like this initial canal that we see right in Montreal, and locks that allow you to overcome differences in height up to a few tens of meters. I'm not going to explain technical details because they're not part of this video. We will limit ourselves to describing some anecdotes of this stretch of navigation, which was really exciting. In Mogal, we make a technical stop of one day, not foreseen in the calendar, but necessary in order to be able to equip ourselves with wooden structures and other suitable to face the interior of these tanks of difference in height. Huge cargo and oil tankers usually sail in this channel. Therefore, they do not need special measures to remain centrally aligned to the rapid change of water level. They also have smooth sides and do not worry at all about any rubbing on the basin walls. No, that was a whole other story. A warship, small and nimble, full of spikes and antennae. Not to mention our beautiful, freshly painted sides. On the occasion of the ceremony a few days ago, moreover, we could not present ourselves in Toronto as someone who arrives with a tattered tailcoat to a gala reception. I made up the idea. It was practically like driving a Ferrari down a dirt road from a quarry. What about us? We didn't scratch our Ferrari, even at the cost of manually pushing the ship so it wouldn't touch the walls. We came out unscathed from those 2 days of navigation in the locks. Let's go back to the stop for a moment. Moral, I was free, and so I took advantage of it to go free. If I remember correctly, it is. Here I bought this cassette of Madonna. Here it says, evidently this cassette is 40 years old. In any case, the anecdote I want to tell you is my experience in a store at the checkout, maybe just as I was buying this, maybe, I don't know, the current currency and the Canadian dollar with all its submultiples, and I wasn't very comfortable handling it for small expenses. So with a handful of coins in hand, I asked the cashier of a shop in perfect French, being my second native speaker without an Italian accent, to help me do the math to pay. She looks at me and replies sarcastically, "Which school did you go to that you can't handle money?" I look her straight in the eye. I was dressed like that, huh? And I say, "Do I look like a Canadian sailor?" You roll your eyes, turn red, and ask what country am I from. I reply, "Italy, and you?" Dat marviglio, j'adore Italy and heches and dais chance and bogatucevu. Io merci, mademoiselle, don't ask me for the translation, please. We return on board, ready to sail for the first locks, since the maneuvering place would last for about a couple of days. All those who usually did the maneuvering place on deck were rotated to the various tasks just to change, because some tasks were heavy and others, like the radio operator in the headset, were of great responsibility and required constant vigilance and attention. Here you see me at Massena Eisenhower Lock. This is the lock and this is me. At other times I would shoot the Indians or with other friends. Between one lock and the other, we would listen to music with this, but every lock was a big challenge and a big commitment. Until we walked out of a section, we were always anxious and ready. Unexpectedly, as in this case, where the straight stern was dangerously approaching the wall, stripping our flank, the heroic and timely intervention of all those who were there, officers, NCOs, sailors. With the help of long offset rods, we avoided the disfigurement. And this has happened on more than one occasion. These images make us understand the danger of these basins and the difference in altitude that we had to overcome. Another particular anecdote that happened to us while navigating the river in transfer from one group of locks to another several miles away. This space was also composed of large, beautiful, wide lakes where yachts and sailing boats sailed for pleasure. Being on the border, You could see units flying the Canadian flag and others flying the American flag, USA. A yacht of about 20 is flanked on starboard. At a safe distance, of course, like many other boats, curious and amazed, obviously, to see a warship on the river. This yacht is full of girls waving to us. The guy at the helm on Latuga with Cowboy Chapel, American classic, greets us too and invites us to jump into the water and get on board his boat. Obviously not seriously. We play a bit, have fun, some jokes, but things take a bad turn when he decides to turn around us, passing from the bow, always safety, passing on the left side, and then passing from the stern, returning on the starboard side. Greetings become taunts on their part, us, of course. We stop greeting and hold back for obvious politeness and bon ton, avoiding replying. We were guests in Canada, but it bothers us a lot, especially when he throws gas to challenge us to pull up a gap for whoever is faster, as sometimes you find yourself the classic bully who challenges you at the traffic light. So pretending he was struggling to keep up with us, I don't remember the speed, but in a navigable channel, speeds are regulated and reduced for safety. And he, ignoring all this, after a couple of feints, he started at full throttle and went around us again to reposition himself in challenge. I don't know if he did it 3 or 4 times. We didn't laugh anymore and they mocked us. But the dragon did not sleep and had enough. The dragon talks about our commander, Captain Nemo, there on that yacht, ignoring the performance characteristics of the Maestrale. It was a modern frigate, not an old battleship. Gas-powered, nimble like a speedboat when it assumed combat attitude. And so, at the umpteenth forward jerk of that yacht, our captain orders full forward. We hear gills and whirlwinds rising, and in an instant we are over 24 knots. Guys. The braggart's face changes from smiling to astonished, his mouth open at full throttle. But at the time yachts of that size hardly exceeded 22 knots, all the maidens on board were also no longer laughing and had changed their expressions. Guess us? Exactly. And he, after pulling sideways for a while, failing to do so, walked straight away and came back. Bye-bye. The commander became our idol, and for the rest of his command. On the Maestrale, and I think many of the crew have looked at it and considered it with different eyes from that day on. But now we're about to enter the lake, a cut. After being fascinated, spending hours on deck admiring the banks of the river conquered by wild nature and its woods, another emotion awaited us that we would never forget again in our lives. It was dusk on July 6, 1985. A particular vision and event was about to happen the event for which this video was primarily produced, the birth of the Ontario wolves. The view on the bridge was so breathtaking that the commander ordered the general intercom to be communicated. We're in the air of the 1,000 islands, all crew on deck. That was more or less the message. What was waiting for us? Before we continue, let's understand what we are talking about. The 1,000 islands, or in Italian, 1,000 isole. It is an archipelago of 1,864 islands located in the St. Lawrence River, where the latter emerges from the northeast corner of Lake Ontario, marking the border between Canada and the United States. They extend about 50 miles downstream of Kingston, Ontario. The Canadian islands are located in the province of Ontario, and the U.S. islands in the state of New York. The size of the islands varies from over 40 square miles to smaller islands occupied by a single residence or uninhabited rock outcrops. To be considered one of the 1,000 islands, the emerging land within the river channel must have at least 1 square foot of land. Above the water level all year round and support at least 2 living trees. Which requirements? Prior to European colonization, the 1,000 Islands region was home to members of the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe people. Their name for the islands was Magnitu Uwana-o. Garden of the Great Spirit, the region was the scene of the War of 1812 between the British Empire and the United States. Many sites of the war can be found, such as Fort Wellington in Prescott County and the Simi Island Garrison in Mallorytown, Ontario. He inspired the authors of Commander Mark and the Wolves of Ontario, described at the beginning of this video. But let's go back aboard the Maestrale that dusk of July 6, 1985. I remember after the announcement I went to Tuga Albatross. That front of the ship where the missile launcher was positioned, and what I saw really made my eyes roll and my mouth drop open. I can only give you an idea with an image created with artificial intelligence, but I assure you that it does not make absolutely. We seemed suspended in a fantastic world in this mist that covered the surfaces of the lake and made glimpses of the islands and the lights on these islands, just as we were at the height of the largest island that practically overlooks Lake Ontario. We heard wolf howls. This island is called Wolf Island. I don't know who was the first to say it among all those of us who watched that wonderful sight and heard that howl, but we began to hear that we are wolves. Wolves volunteer instantly. This birthmark spread throughout the crew outside and penetrated inside all the premises. Everyone, without exception, we begin to say, we are wolves of Ontario. That atmosphere had bewitched us. The set of images, sounds, and emotions had etched in our minds indelibly. This identity. Looking back on those moments, I relive the sensations and emotions of the moment. I am. I am a wolf from Ontario. From Wolf Island, sailing all night on the lake, on the morning of July 7, 1985, we arrived in Toronto. These photos were taken just before we docked on the bench. In the first one, there is me. You can see a little dark time. We didn't arrive peacefully. We were expecting something like this, with a brighter skyline, but it didn't matter. We were in Toronto, another city where the Italian presence was very numerous. We knew that we would receive visitors and have a warm welcome, especially from our fellow citizens who emigrated to this beautiful country. We moored in the harbor at downtown Harborfront, practically under the 533.3 m tall tower held the record for the world's tallest freestanding structure for 32 years, from 1975 to 2007, when it was surpassed by the Burj Khalifa and was the world's tallest tower, until 2009, when it was surpassed by the Canton Tower. It is currently the 10th tallest freestanding structure in the world, and remains the tallest freestanding structure on land in the Western Hemisphere. And this is a picture of our beautiful Maestrale, taken right from the top of the... We went in, it was around 8:30 when we attacked the bench. Between the amazement of some inhabitants and what I think then was a hotel right in front of the dock, going out even in bathrobes to look at this military ship under the windows, we finished docking at the dock, was the flag on the flight deck aft. I remember someone asking us if we were Mexican. You know why this is the Mexican flag, and this is the flag of the Italian Navy. At first visual impact, being from the American continent and at a distance, I could exchange the flag of the Italian Navy for the Mexican one, highlighting, however, a big ignorance. The Mexican flag has an eagle in the white band, and we have the jack of the 4 maritime republics. But wait, judge the Canadians for this error. Did you know that the flag of the Italian Navy is different from that of the Merchant Navy? Yeah, sure you know the difference. Oh, of course you will say the military one has the turreted crown and the merchant one does not. Because there is another important difference that distinguishes the two flags that almost never anyone notices. And yet, look at this picture of the two jacks compared. Don't you notice anything? Bravi. Now you have seen that in addition to the presence or absence of the turreted crown, the Lion of St. Mark also changes, the war lion with closed gospel and swords in hand, the mercantile one ready for dialogue with open gospel. I think the concept is clear, but let's get back on board. As we complete the docking operations, the authorities and the ritual courtesies begin to arrive, the good walk of the arbor front fills with people, including important indigenous personalities. Here is Sergeant Cusano Domenico with this dignitary, perhaps a Red Leader from that part of Ontario. It is not a fake costume, it is precisely a sort of high representative uniform in an official capacity to welcome the Italian ship. People begin to ask for information about the ship, the port from which it left, and above all, Italian Canadians begin to arrive asking if there are members from this or that city. In 1980, the world was not as connected as it is today. I mentioned it at the beginning of the video, a trip to Canada, or from Canada, in Italy, It cost a fortune, maybe an immigrant. He had no chance to return to Italy, not even for a holiday, for decades. Even an intercontinental phone call, as they were then called, cost a lot and was rare. So rare that over time, the physiological detachment of the family in Matrapatia occurred. When it was said that maybe without knowing it, you had an uncle in America, it's hard to even think about it today. We have internet and low-cost flights. But then it was not like that. For an emigrant, it was sometimes like an exile with no return. And now they saw that piece of iron with the Italian flag, with a crew of Italians who was a piece of Italy in Canada. And not so much to say. International law for navies establishes that it has the same diplomatic status as an embassy. So getting on board the Maestrale along the walkway or the Barsarizzo meant crossing the border and entering Italy. Do you understand the emotion of those people? I will make it even more tearful by telling you what happened to me personally. Finished the place of maneuvering, each member of the crew assumes from 7 the assignments of board on the bench, and in the morning, after breakfast and before every other activity, reach his own washing place. The part of ship assigned to keep in order, clean daily, together with own department. I don't remember if it lasted 30 or 45 minutes or even an hour. While together with my comrades in the department, I was busy cleaning, I hear the general intercom on board, saying, "Mistral, Sergeant ECG, I eat at the guardhouse, I arrive at the guardhouse." The head guard was my colleague, Sergeant CG Sepe Eraldo. And I see that he smiles at me with a very amused expression, and he says, "There's a relative of yours here. I'm my relative. I don't have any relatives in Canada." As I say this, I see a man who is looking at me with a moved face, full of tears, and asks me, "Are you from Montescaglioso?" I lived in Montescaglioso at the time, and I did. "I live in Montescaglioso." He throws himself on me and hugs me tightly, sobbing, "You come from my land. I am di Pomarico." I think he said municipality near Montescaglioso. In fact, I was the only crew member who came from Basilicata. So for him, I represented his region, his family that he had left in Italy many years before, when he was a boy. He was in his 50s now. He had only returned to Italy once, many years before. Then he never had the chance again. At that moment, it was me from his land who had come to visit him. I know, it can make you smile. But this was Italy and Italians who emigrated to Canada after World War II. In the 80s, I don't remember his name, but his last name does. Pecoraro had 2 daughters. I think one was called Linda, or more or less like that. And a rose here, you see me in the picture with me, this is pink. The good man did not merely greet me, but demanded to speak to the commander, obviously for what he had to say. It was enough to talk to the second in command, also for competence in the management of on-board personnel. He demanded and obtained that I should spend as much time as possible with him during the entire stay in Toronto. I accepted because this way I avoided services and guards, but then condition. I would have been free to participate in trips organized for the on-board staff, such as the magnificent Niagara Falls. Here you see me on that occasion, together with my companions, enjoying this fantastic experience. And the other condition was that in the evenings I had to be free to go out with my shipmates. While for the rest of the day I was with him around Toronto, excellent hospitality brought me to his house, a typical American house with the television on the floor like this, full of memories and recalls to Italy. As an emigrant can remember his country of departure as a custom and the period in which he left it. I repeat, on that occasion, I met the two daughters, Linda with her boyfriend, and Rosa prepared me a spaghettata coi fiocchi, a party at home all for me, even with the neighbors that he also called other Italians, to introduce me as a relative who had arrived from Italy. Obviously, being in the uniform of the Italian Navy, people understood and shared this spirit of repatriation by proxy. He took me to the factory where he worked to introduce me to his employer, colleagues, taking 4 days off to be with me. He took me to the top of the Kian Tower, various Toronto landmarks, and Italian restaurants. He didn't let me pay a penny. The whole time I was with him, he asked me to take a small package to his relatives in Italy. I don't know what was in it, but I remember when he gave it to me. On the morning of July 11th, 1985, just before leaving the moorings, he boarded the ship at the gatehouse to deliver them. He looked at him and said, "I would like to get into this little package and come with you to Italy." He hugged me tightly, greeted me affectionately, and then bent to the ground and kissed the deck of the ship, because that was Italian territory and he wanted to greet it. Perhaps all this will seem excessive to you in 2024, certainly. In 1985, this was not considered excessive at all. I handed over the package to his emotional relatives with tears in my eyes about 2 months later during my leave. Toronto was and is a magnificent city, surrounded by the wild nature of wonderful Canada, an oxymoron that cannot fail to fascinate the visitor of this country, a hospitable and generous country. The reception had been really exceptional. Consider that even the councillor for public transport issued a special pass for the crew of the Maestrale ship so that they could move and use all public transport in the city for free. Here, too, the press welcomed us enthusiastically, even writing a greeting article in Italian and with a photo of our sailors. Here we see our deputy radar specialist, combat systems specialist. Massimo Cardinale is the staff of the welcome on board, with a couple of pulsels captured by the Italian nautical charm. The same Massimo Cardinale that we find here while distributing the explanatory brochure of the history and main features of Nave Maestrale during the visits on board. The visits on board, very long queues of hundreds of meters. The same rules applied as Halifax lap of external decks with internal passage of the bridge. But unlike Halifax, here we were the only military ship present, and Italian at that. The visitors, especially Italian Canadians, came from far away. Italian-American visitors also crossed the US-Canada border to see and visit the Mistral. Queues lasted hours throughout the day, with staff working in shifts to manage them, who, however, arrived very tired at the end of the shift. That is why our maximum in spite is in derogation from military rigor. He was sitting in this photo, but it was really done with joy, seeing those faces admired by everything they saw, the idea of stepping on Italian soil thousands of kilometers away from the motherland, feeling all the expressions of gratitude for the welcome on board, amply repaid the effort. What were the other activities of the crew during the stop canteen? Crew to respective squares to consume meals and exchange experience on the ground, as well as take advantage of shopping. I bought this, you went to call home. Intercontinental phone calls, remember? And here are Radar Sergeant Antonio Savarese and Electronic Technical Sergeant Federico Poli, waiting in a telephone office for this type of service while waiting for their turn. I also called home on this occasion after about a month that my family, my mother in particular, had not heard from me, and he had no idea where I was. I never told my mother where I was going when I went out to sea. This time, I told her I would be missing a couple of months because I was leaving for Canada, but the details and stages were unknown to her. Why? Because like all moms, she was too anxious and apprehensive when a child does things that are out of her reach. Can you imagine it today? Impossible. They would have created the WhatsApp group of the mothers of the Maestrale. Unlivable, in my opinion, wonderful 1985 for this particular. Because only in this way do you live real exciting adventures when you detach yourself for a period from your loved ones and your places, and then endure a beautiful true trial. But one of the most beautiful and exciting moments was the party on board. I explained earlier how it worked with the Sheikh's tent and all that. Magic Toronto. As I said earlier, we were one ship with space limited to the hangar and Vorse Bridge outside. A whole town full of girls who wanted to participate. Priority boarding to all girls who had an invitation written by one of us, member of the crew. The invitation was personal, not transferable. And without an escort, the boys wouldn't get on board. On the evening of the party, a huge crowd gathered on the dock, and lots of police cars arrived to keep order, especially for the very animated discussions between guys who wanted to get on board and their guys who didn't have the same opinion, obviously. It was not our problem, and the situation was handled by the police with the removal of the couple or the single boy. Annoyed? Sad? Perhaps? But it was the unwritten law of Italian sailors on board. There was no gender equality in this case, also because the place was small and could not be wasted with male presences. I, as per the condition of my Canadian guest, was free and present at this party. With the arrival of the first girls on board, who we made to sit on wooden folding chairs all around the edge of the tent, we began to make a choice and to invite the ones we liked the most. These a couple of photos with, in evidence, our ECG underboss, Gianni Meo, and others at the beginning of the evening. After that, it would be impossible to take any more photos. Needless to say, All the girls who arrived, since they had been invited by the crew members, were one more beautiful than the other. I felt like a teddy bear falling into a barrel of honey, and I think that feeling was shared by a good part of the crew. My English was limited. Siayu mu o n ene yukong, and some other circumstantial phrases. The rest was part of the universal language of the boy-girl relationship, no details. And so approaching one of these that had particularly impressed me, my "Do you want to dance?" with the best smile, and if she looks at me, she remains silent, impassive. Then he smiles. But she remains still. As if I didn't understand, I turned to my always dear, inseparable companion, Salvatore Grasso, and tell him, "Come on, this is too stupid. Let's forget it." She suddenly gets up and says, "Oh no, you're dancing with me now. I'm Italian." And I tell him, "And why didn't you answer me sooner? What about you? What about yours?" English was too funny. "I wanted to see how you were doing." Antonella's name was. She was from Savona and was on holiday in Toronto with Italian-Canadian relatives while we danced many lenti. The DJ was also our accomplice. Our favorites were our favorite dances, also our guests' favorites. The Ponte di Moro fills to maximum capacity, and access to additional guests is closed. And you know what Canadians invent on the dock aboard a ship? We had the music really loud, of course. And then they start dancing and having fun like a second dance floor. Awesome, just wonderful and great to see all this. Meanwhile, on board, the girls were now about 4-5 to 1. That is 4 or 5 girls for every sailor. So my Italian companion shared me with her friends and friends of friends. What do you mean? Never letting go of my hand in the passage from one girl to another, who in the meantime had also visited the drinks counter by raising their elbows a little. Already here we open a small parenthesis. In Canada and the United States, it is strictly forbidden to drink alcohol under a certain age. I don't remember if it was 18, 19 years old, or even prison. Who would violate this law? It had happened to me in Halifax, inviting girls to drink and the bartenders to give them their papers. But there was a big exception. Remember that a military ship enjoys the diplomatic status of an embassy. It is also Italian territory. Yeah, well, you have the answer. Cross the gangway and board. These girls were no longer in Canada but in Italy, therefore under Italian law, which is, however, restrictive and careful for those who are minors, with 2 important aspects. But minors were not on board, and we did not feel like treating them badly. To our guests, preventing them from enjoying the drinks in our bar. But you know another curious thing. We had everything in our Italian illusion. We had stocked up on Coca-Cola 7-Up, which, as it was called at the time, Fanta, etc. But what do you prefer this? Surprisingly, they preferred the wine. The brick tavern we had on board for our meals was quickly consumed after a few parties in Canada. The supply in the galley had dangerously reduced to the point it was no longer available during meals to keep it for the parties. Italian wine, even in cardboard, is always Italian wine. In the late morning of July 11th, 1985, we leave Harbour Front and leave Toronto. It seemed as if the whole city had stopped to come and greet us. It was a Thursday, so a working day. Yet it seemed like a holiday never seen before. A large crowd gathered for our departure, with many tears and applause, particularly from many girls. We were also emotional, with bright eyes and lumps in our throats. It is difficult to part from people who have shown us much affection and see us as a representation of Italy going back to Europe. These are intense sensations and emotions that you rarely experience in your life and definitely leave your mark. Don't you believe it? This video is proof. I had to take quite a few breaks while preparing the script because in the effort to remember, not only did the memories flood back, but so did the intense emotions. I cannot describe it to you. Only other Ontario wolves like me can understand, and I'm certain those of you watching this video can feel your throats tighten and your eyes water. Those near them observe this. Tell me if I'm wrong, okay? Yes, but here's a twist for you. From this point, I don't recall anything. I'm not joking. I don't remember our journey on the lake. The return route through the locks, passing in front of Montreal and Quebec, is just a blur, along with the arrival in Port Sydney. In Port Sydney, we dock on July 15, 1985. I barely remember a mooring place with so many people waiting for us. Many were from the Italian-Canadian community of Port Sydney, and some from the Italian-Canadian community of Halifax. Plus, there were girls we had met in Halifax a few weeks before they joined us. The distance between Halifax and Port Sydney was only 350 kilometers, so they wanted to repeat the experience with us and our parties on board. Here too, the warmth of the Canadian and Italian-Canadian community was fantastic. This is evidenced by many of my travel companions and the written communication of Welcome Together. A tribute to the ship there. She came on board, and it was clear that a welcome party would be held just like before. This is evidenced by an article. Newspaper, after all. One passage in particular confirms what was said on the occasion of the invitations to the girls for the party on board in Toronto. This part highlighted in particularly what I translate says. All the girls in Sydney are invited to tonight's party without their boyfriends, of course. And this sentence seems to have been said by the then sub-lieutenant Paulo Treo, written here, huh? This same Paulo Treu is shown in this 2019 photo where he is appointed commander. Leading the naval team, water has certainly passed under the keel. Other proof that I have been to possess is this commemorative brochure of the bicentenary of the foundation of the city. Other I cannot remember according to the navigation table. On the morning of July 18th, 1985, after only 3 days of rest, we set out on a new route to the Atlantic Ocean, direction Funchal on the island, Madeira, where we arrived on July 24th, 1985. Surely this island must have been magnificent and welcoming, but I think my memory loss was due to an excess of Canadian emotions. Then for my 20s, there were just too many. I was looking forward to it. To come back, home, and not just me. After an additional 3 more days on this extraordinary island, on the date of July 27, 1985, we finally set sail for the last 1,480 nautical miles, which separated us from our naval base in La Spezia. In just 4 days, after successfully crossing the Strait of Gibraltar, we at last arrived at our destination. Do you mean within radar view of the Italian coast? Yes, indeed, within radar view. This implies that with a sufficiently extensive scale of video representations, you can observe beyond the visual horizon. Also, when the radar operator in this context, did he report it? He went out in blanket scanning the horizon. I waited tirelessly for several hours. First, to be able to see the land. But I wasn't the only one. Many, hand by hand, they were added. The longing of a sailor who, after every adventure, longs for more. Go home to your loved ones and narrate his diverse experiences in detail of distant places. Behold, the tongue of land extends. As we draw nearer, I spot the island of Tino in the distance. And as we close in, even the Teneto, along with the looming Apuan Alps in the backdrop, marking the place of maneuver clearly. In general, here I stand in my designated spot. Situated center left, but with emotions unlike those upon departure, equally thrilling and intense. And with joy and anticipation, I head home. Once more on this occasion, I perceive, move away, with a lump in my throat. The promontory we're behind is Porto Venere, then the Grazie, where they have their base. The determined raiders of Marina Fesano, and upon reaching the peak of Cadimare, we make our entrance. Our base constructions begin as the maneuvering ship carefully drops its anchor. Cars back? They shoot blood. Cables travel on the bench. Ensure the headway is checked. Engines are moving forward. The ship remains stationary and securely moored, and the gangway is lowered graciously. After covering approximately 11,156 nautical miles, equating to around 21,034 days of relentless navigation and making 29 significant stopovers in various foreign ports, for a total of 63 days of emissions, we have finally returned to our home base, safe and sound. And here we are at the end of this video of this story of mine. The story of an Ontario wolf that got its name in 1985 on the lake of the same name in Canada. But I wasn't alone. There were about 225 wolves, from the captain to the mariner. 225 different stories, albeit as a common route and adventure. But there are also all those who met us on this fantastic overseas mission. I'm talking about my Canadian friends, my Italian-Canadian brothers. As you can see, after 40 years, we are still united in fraternal memory. And so I ask all of you, wolves and friends of wolves, who have lived that experience, to tell your story too. Let's tell it together, if you prefer. I only told what I experienced subjectively and in a minimal way. As a sailor on the mythical Maestrale, through the eyes of a 20-year-old boy in 1985. Regrets? No. Nostalgia? Yes. If you're watching 6-1 Wolf. Write in the comments your rank category, name and surname at the time of the mission, and add present. You're watching 6-1 Friend, a Canadian brother who lived part of this amazing adventure with us. Write in the comments your port or city, name and surname, and add present. Whether you are a wolf or not, if you want to tell your story, write me to this email, a warm greeting from your wolf from far away.